Welcome, travelers, to my realm of nightmares. Allow me to be your personal assistant. Come in, take a seat, get comfortable. For when you step into my realm, there's no stepping out.
I have a story that actually got me off the deep/dark web altogether. I actually didn't know much about everything. I was unaware of what Tor was, all the encryption stuff and whatnot, but I really wasn't very well versed in what exactly made the deep and dark web different from the surface web. Well, I knew the dark web was illegal stuff, but I was curious how it was able to exist, how things worked, why the cops hadn't taken it down, and so on and so forth. It was a bit of a weird, ignorant view on things, but as time went on and I educated myself, I started understanding how encryption and anonymity worked. Unfortunately, as I learned, I found myself feeling more confident. I started out as just looking around at things, then I started commenting in forums, then I moved to actually commenting with people instead of just making mindless comments. I kind of felt at home in a few of the communities, and it was nice to kind of live amongst a bunch of people all over the world and just talk about random things that had no real bearing on everyday life. It was almost my escape from reality, which isn't something that a lot of people can say. Well, as I quickly learned, the deep web isn't all rainbows and unicorns. Actually, I don't think it's rainbows and unicorns at all. I just got in with decent people. As I was pursuing my usual forums, I found a post by someone that I'd spoken with a few times, and I thought they were pretty cool. The forum post said something to the effect of, "Message me for invite to Red Friday party." I was all about parties, and again, I was comfortable with these people, so I figured it'd be a good time, just hanging out online with some anonymous people from the internet, chatting about nothing in particular. What I got, however, was not a party. Now I'm sure you can see where this is going, and here you're probably thinking, but OP, red rooms don't exist. And I can tell you that while they don't really exist as an easy to access nod on the dark web, at least one does exist, and it's shared very privately. This Red Friday party was set up to look like a very basic live stream. A camera, some dimmed out red lights, and a girl that was in front of the camera. She looked fairly normal. She didn't look upset or terrified or anything, and she was reading chat pretty nonchalantly. At first, I thought this was going to be one of those just chatting streams or whatever. People were asking her questions about herself, and she would answer shyly. Most of the questions were pretty normal. A few were a bit sexual and direct, but she would avoid them. After watching her just describe her everyday life for a few minutes, I noticed a timer on the top of the screen that was counting down and was a couple minutes away from 0. I waited for it to count down, and when it did, there was a ringing noise, and a guy's voice came on from off screen. He said something to the effect, "Alright, chat, time is up. Now, we will get into the donation requests only. Get your coins ready, because it's going to be a blast." I could see the look on her face shift from shy to straight up nervous. She said something like, "I don't want to do this." The other voice very firmly and loudly said, "You stole from me, and these guys are going to pay your debt. You do what they say until we're square, or things go south really fast." You know the saying, it's like a train wreck. You can't look away. That's how this was with me. I wanted to close this out and never think of it ever again, but part of me had to watch. The whole thing started when people donated small amounts of Bitcoin for stupid things. Put a shoe in your head, show us your feet, try to lick your elbow. Honestly, stupid stuff. It wasn't that bad for the first few minutes, but then the higher amount started to pour in for other things. They were telling her to take her clothes off, do other things that I won't mention. She was visibly distraught the whole time, but she complied. As bad as that was, I didn't expect the next part, One person chimed in with 2 Bitcoin, which was a lot of money at the time, and told her to cut her cheek with a knife. She shook her head no, and said that she couldn't do that, but the man chimed in, said to do it, and handed her a small pocket knife. She started to sob, and quickly sliced her cheek, causing herself to bleed. Then there was another donation for several more Bitcoin that said cut off a finger. She was already sobbing at this point, and yelling no, saying she was done, that she wanted to leave. He started yelling, grabbing her hand, and did it for her. This was mortifying, obviously, but the last part got worse. There were people donating dozens of Bitcoin to the stream, and the things they wanted were sick. Then one chimed in with a 50 Bitcoin donation and said, "I'm bored, get rid of her." This was then matched with a number of other people donating similar amounts and echoing the exact same sentiment. I just sat there for a moment, watching her scream and cry, begging for her life, and then watching a man walk into the scene of the camera with what looked like a machete. I didn't continue watching, and I will say the thought of all this made me physically ill. I literally threw up in the trash can by my desk. That was seriously the worst thing I have ever seen, and it completely made me swear off anything beyond the surface web. Hell, since then, I've been nearly scared to use my computer and do anything beyond use Facebook or surf the front page of Reddit. I have no idea if what I saw was real, or a pre-recorded snuff-like horror movie, or if it was a legit Red Room party. I don't know if the chat was real or pre-recorded, but part of me tells me that she was being held hostage, and what I saw actually happened. While Red Rooms may not really be a big thing, something akin to them does exist, and I highly recommend never, ever going to a dark web live stream just in case. I have an interesting dark web story from a perspective that most people don't get. Namely, from the perspective of someone that used to actually work for an associate of a site that was kinda sorta like Silk Road. Nowadays, I work for a company that contracts out cybersecurity stuff, mostly penetration testing and threat hunting. It's fun. I like working on the safe side of things, doing work for the man, and getting paid to break things for them. And I never will go back to the dark side of things, especially after what happened. I'm not trying to hype it up. What happened was absolutely horrifying, but it is the truth, and it's what happens when mistakes are made working with criminals. So, like I said, I used to work with a couple of guys that did dark web style business, mostly selling illegal stuff like drugs, and mostly drugs. In fact, yeah, it's best to just say we sold a lot of substances to people that couldn't or wouldn't get a prescription for a premium. We had a lot of customers, and most of them were repeat customers, and we had a very well encrypted list of everyone that we had worked with in the past, including their regular orders, and we had a very well constructed method of shipping. We would ship the items in boxes that looked like they were from other companies, and we hid the good stuff with other stuff in ways that made it unlikely they'd be found. This was a while back, before Silk Road was actually busted, so people weren't really looking for substances like that in the mail. My part of this operation was actually system security. I was in charge of keeping the site running and making sure no one ever got information that we held, including who was in the operation and the list of customers. I was good at my job. We never got hit by any honeypot operatives. I was good at sniffing out cops that were trying to do purchases, and we never had any security or downtime issues. I also kept the overall site looking clean, which may not be something that really means anything, but to me, we had the nicest looking dark web market that existed. I was actually proud of the work I'd done on it. Now that you know me, the operation, the site, and all the stuff, let's talk about the part of it that became problematic. A man that we will simply call Rob. Rob was the ringleader of the whole thing, and we knew that he was in charge. Hell, most of us just accepted that it was his business, and as long as we got paid, we didn't really care what went on. Rob was the business manager that decided working, doing illegal stuff, was the best way to pay back the money he owed on his student loans, and he was a bit cocky when it came to doing the work he did. He was actually arrested at one point on unrelated charges, and we all thought we were going to be the next, seeing as how he liked to talk. Thankfully, nothing happened, and he was let go. He said it was because he had a good lawyer, but I don't know. Anyways, let's talk about the situation that actually happened. As I said, we all ran a little business on the dark web, selling illegal substances. Things went smoothly, and everyone was happy. That is, until they didn't, and then nobody was happy. Despite all the minor hiccups that did happen, it wasn't a huge deal until we had one specific customer that was very displeased with our services. We're going to call this customer Chris. Chris had a drug addiction, and Chris was probably our most frequent customer. And Chris was also a very aggressive person when it came to communications. I know what you're thinking. Why are you in frequent communications with a customer if you're selling illegal items on the dark web? Unfortunately, it was Chris that was in communication with us. There was always something wrong with his order. I wasn't involved getting the content, the shipping, or the actual business side, so I just kind of ignored the situation. I ran the back-end servers, which included our messaging systems, so I saw all the communications that went on. Unfortunately, Rob, being the hard-headed jerk he was, liked to antagonize Chris when he was being irrational. He would message him, saying that he was an idiot, to not purchase from us ever again, etc. The last time this all went down, Chris messaged back saying that if we didn't get his order right, he was going to go to the cops. There are a handful of things you don't do when you're dealing with people on the dark web, and one of them is starting to contact the police and shut down the operation. When this message came through, Rob sent out a correspondence to all of us saying that this customer was to be blacklisted, and that he'd be contacting people within our markets to make sure he was never sold to again. The problem is, Rob sent this to Chris as well. My guess was that it was to send a message. You mess with us, I'll cut you off. Well, while there are things you don't do to those that operate dark web businesses, there are also things you don't do to irritate drug addicts that know how to use the dark web. The situation went from unsavory to absolute hellstorm. At the time of all this happening, I was actually staying with Rob for a few days due to some personal issues at home. He had turned the back half of his basement into a bit of a spare room and several closets, so I was lucky enough to sleep where my work was. Anyways, I was actually downstairs working on something irrelevant to the situation when I heard what sounded like someone kicking in the door. I immediately ran up to the top of the stairs, but stopped in the doorway to see what the hell was going on. There I see a 6-foot-something guy that had to be north of 300 pounds, standing in the door with what looked like a shotgun in his hands, and Rob on his knees, literally begging this guy not to kill him. I heard Rob call him Chris, which told me all I needed to know. This wasn't going to end well, and I was likely going to be next. I stepped down the stairs as quietly as I could, and went down into the area beneath the steps, basically behind the server closet, and I dialed 911 on my phone. When they answered, I just told them the address and said I needed officers immediately because there was a man with a gun that had just broken in and hung up. I didn't want to give them any of my information since, I'm kind of a criminal. No more than a few seconds after I hung up, I heard someone screaming and a gunshot. I knew what that meant. I waited there until I was certain he had left, and then I did the most cowardly thing I could. I climbed my way up and out of the basement window with my backpack, and I walked calmly to the McDonald's that was pretty much across the street, so I could see what played out. The cops showed up, then the ambulance, then the coroner and crime scene guys. I listened to the police radio to see if they ever caught the guy. There was actually some crosstalk about the situation, but in the end, they jumped to the encrypted channels, and I lost track of what they were doing. My stay at Rob's house was a very temporary thing, and I had most of my stuff in my backpack, so I wasn't overly worried about them knowing I was there. I did go into cleanup mode with the servers though. They were nuked entirely, so no information was ever pulled. It was a pretty messed up situation, and I really did feel bad for what happened to Rob, but in the end, if you're going to work as a criminal, you have to face the consequences of being a criminal. Did he deserve to die? No, absolutely not. But that's how Chris saw it. So my final suggestion, avoid the dark web. Deep web stuff is fine, it's pretty safe, but do not go down the rabbit hole, because sometimes what you find may be unpredictable. I'd like to preface this story by saying that if you have any curiosities about the deep and dark web, just get rid of it right now. If you're an everyday user and you aren't in the know of how onion routing, encryption, VPNs, etc. work, then use stories like this one to satiate your curiosity. Don't start down the rabbit hole, and don't dig any deeper than you need to. That said, let's go into some backstory. I am a tech nerd 100%. I'm the type of person that was ripping apart old PCs in the 80s and putting them back together just to see what worked with what. Mind you, that was back when I was a kid. I learned all about tech back then, and I took the passion into my adulthood. So, I work in IT, if that wasn't obvious, and I know about a lot of what goes on out there on the net. Now, that's all well and good, and that's all surface web and surface tech level stuff. The question from here becomes, how does being a geek equal dark web horror story? Simple. I've been there. In fact, I've been there probably more than many of these stories that you heard on this channel, and many others out there. I've seen quite a bit, and maybe I'll give you a few more stories in the future. But this one is one that I think is worth telling, mostly because it's honestly terrifying. Back when I was on the dark web frequently, there was one site that I used to venture towards frequently. Obviously, I'm not naming that site because, as far as I know, it's still out there. This site was kind of like a dark web bazaar. You could buy pretty much anything and everything you could really want, and it wasn't terribly expensive. I used to buy things that were less than legal, and I even used to sell some stuff that was also less than legal. Honestly, this site had everything. Substances, weapons, stolen goods. If you wanted it, you could find it there. The dealers had their ratings that would pretty much tell you how reputable they were, and the higher the rating, the better the overall services or quality of what you ordered. Think eBay, but for drugs and other illegal stuff. One day, and one conversation sticks in my mind as probably the most memorable thing that ever happened while I was on the dark web and this particular site. I was browsing the content for the hell of it, seeing what was out there that I may have wanted to blow money on, and I saw an entry that was a bit strange. Girlfriend for sale. Honestly, I thought it was a joke. Maybe someone was selling their old silicone doll and wanted to have an eye-catching title. I went to the page and scrolled down to the description, and it didn't help any more than the title. It simply said, "Selling my girlfriend, message for details." At this point, I felt like I had to message the person, so I did. Here's how the conversation went. Me: I wanted to ask about your girlfriend for sale? Him: alright, what do you want to know? Me: pretty much everything. Him: alright, she's 27, a bit on the thick side. She has black hair, green eyes, freckles. There's more information that he included. He used other words to describe her body type, gave exact measurements, and went into a bit of personal detail on her. I'm not going to put them on here, as I want to keep this story out of the graphic territory. After he told me all this, I obviously knew it wasn't a sex doll. He was legitimately trying to sell a real person. I wasn't sure what to do or say at this point, so I said, go on. Him, would you like to see her? It may make it easier to see if you're interested. Me, okay. He then sent me a few pictures of this woman, tied up and gagged in his basement. She looked exactly like he'd explained. Her wrists were bound with duct tape, and she had a chain around her neck that looked to be connected to a concrete pillar in the basement. The look on her face was one of legitimate terror. You could tell she had been crying excessively, and her hair was a mess. He then sent me a picture of her and what I'll describe as compromised situations and positions. I won't go into the details, but honestly, it made me want to vomit. When I clicked on this entry on the site, I was expecting it to be a joke, but these pictures and what he had told me had me pretty certain that this was real, and that scared the hell out of me. Then he sent me another message. I have one other interested buyer that's offering $70K cash by next week. If he can get me at least $75K, she's yours. I was so shocked that the only thing I could think to do was ask what her name was. To which he replied, sorry, I can't give out her name in case you would do something stupid, like try to find her or contact the police. I replied with, oh no, I wouldn't dare. I was just curious. His response to that chilled me to the bone. Good, because it wouldn't matter. There's no one that'll miss her. And on paper, she's been dead for a month. I'll do what I can to make my transactions stress-free. That includes my prospective buyers. I expect them to help me keep things stress-free, so please don't do anything stupid. He compounded this last statement with a smiley face emoji, which really added to the threat, to be honest. I honestly had no idea what to say. I didn't know if this was legitimate, or if it was a honeypot seller trying to arrest human traffickers. I just told him I would try to get the money together, and if he didn't hear from me by the time the other seller came through, that it was fine. I didn't want to raise any alarms with this guy regardless of who he really was. I really don't have much more to the story, other than to say that I have no idea what happened to her, or the seller. I didn't follow up, and it just kind of let the situation go. I know this makes me an awful person, and I've lost sleep over it, but I'm more hopeful that it was just a honeypot, and that he was just trying to lure me in to being arrested more than actually trying to sell his girlfriend. This story is going to be a bit technical, and I know that may turn some people off of it. But the technical side is important to know exactly what it is that made this such a weird situation for me. I'm going to try to keep it a bit simplified, so my apologies if the techie in me breaks through. For some background on who I am, I did 2 jobs in my daily life: front-end web development and back-end web connections. The first job has me building out websites for users, and includes both coding of the pages as well as the overall user interface. The second job has me watching server connections and seeing what traffic goes where and who connects to what. The best way to look at it like this: if you connect to a website, you're connecting to a web server, most likely in a data center. Those data centers have routers, internal gateways, load balancers, and a bunch of other devices that most home users will never touch in their lives, and a lot of it does something boring. That being said, most people know what a firewall is, or at least that it filters traffic based on rules. Those rules tell you what you can and cannot connect, and what to do with traffic that isn't specifically laid out, accept or deny. All that technical BS out of the way, my job requires that I understand how connections happen, and that I need to know how to determine where an IP is connecting from. That comes in handy, as I may be able to see an IP in China is trying to connect to our local government's website in Ohio, which typically results in those IPs getting blacklisted. Basically, pinpointing the geographical location of an IP address. It sounds complicated, but a lot of the information is easily accessible, and with a bit of know-how, you can usually get a good estimate of the location. Now, I've dabbled in the dark web a few times, and I like to know what I'm doing. Most of the time, connections on the deep web are encrypted, and it is difficult to find out who is where and what's going on. Most of the time, the people that run the dark websites don't have much of a connection to the surface web, but it does happen. There was this one time that it ended up on the deep website that wasn't very well built, or at least not very well protected. This site was for Bitcoin transactions and money transfers, and based on what they described, they were used for very specific, very illegal adult content. You would think that they would keep this kind of thing behind good technology, and that you would never have to worry about your data being accessed. Well, you'd be wrong in this case. The site itself had pieces of code that were static, including connections to the static IP address while checking out. Lesson 1 in security: never hardcode anything. Always code with dynamics in mind. Anyways, I pulled what was static in the connections. There were only a couple IPs. One of them seemed not to respond to traffic at all, which I expected, but the other one, that was consistently labeled as home throughout the code, seemed to be a web server that wasn't locked down at all. I connected to the admin port on the server, and to my surprise, the log information was the default credentials. I was expecting the server to be mostly empty, but as I traversed the directories, I was honestly surprised. Looking at what was on the server, this was the server, the one that was running the payment processing for illegal content, and they were storing all their data on this server. There was even an IP access log that was holding on to a list of all the systems that had connected and made transactions over the past 2 years. As I dug deeper into the server, I found something that honestly creeped me out. There was a directory on the web server that was for a school district website. The server that was tracking payments for the site that ran very illegal content was also holding the public surface web-facing site for a school district. Looking at the information that was saved on some of the pages, it was a school district that taught everything from pre-K through 12 and was down south. My initial thought was that maybe this server was hosted by a third party, but after checking the IP address on the geolocator, it was confirmed that this server was 100% hosted on a static IP address assigned to the school district. The school probably had no idea that they were passing Bitcoin transactions for such vile content, but someone there knew, and they were taking full advantage of having access to the servers in a government-funded IP address. I gathered all the information, including how I found the server, what the server was hosting, and how insecure the server was, and took screenshots. I bundled it all up and sent it to the superintendent of the district, advising them that they need to look into who was running their servers. I only ever got one email back, basically saying thanks and that they were looking into it. My guess is that they handed it over to the local police, or they did an internal investigation. Obviously, they're not going to tell me. Obviously, they're not going to tell me the end result. In my head, though, the sicko that was taking advantage of the schools like this is in prison. Tonight's stories were 4 deep web stories. If you enjoyed these and you would like to see more of them in the future, please let me know down in the comments section. As always, I'd like to say a special thank you to all my lovely Patreons. 242 reads, Rando Calrissian, Seraphine the Midnight Bard, Creepy Clown Girl, Mia Mina, Philia Noctis, Hair-Raising Narratives, Spooky Boo's Scary Story Time, Lycan Trucker, Nathaniel Nelson, and Pimp Demon. If you'd like to join these lovely travelers but I'll light my fire, you can do so by becoming a Patreon as well. Just remember the support is always appreciated but never expected. Please don't forget to like, comment, share, subscribe, and ding that bell for future content if you're new, as it will really help push this video into the algorithm and helps the channel grow.
But as always, travelers, once you step into my realm, there's no stepping out.